Hello, welcome to my Frost Mage Dragonflight Season 1 rotation guide. Just like the Arcane guide, I'm going to be covering single target, Cleave, and Mythic Plus talents and rotations, as well as some conditional requirements, and then weak auras, and a little bit of an advanced section, but that's tied to conditionals this time around. So this is what our single target talent tree is going to look like for Season 1. There's some, minor variations, but this is what is majorly recommended for the majority of content. The main choices are going to come in your class tree because your spec tree is very rigid. First of all, you can take displacement. It doesn't really matter. This point doesn't matter at all. You can throw it somewhere else on the tree. Meteor sims about 0.5% better than shifting power in pure single target. So if there's something that you need your shifting power for to get your cooldowns back up faster in single target, you can run that pretty easily, say like a boss burn or something, or if the boss moves a lot so meteor's not as valuable, then you can run shifting power and not feel bad about it. The other thing is temporal warp versus time anomaly. Time anomaly is more of the base pick here. It's what I generally recommend you stay locked in with. Temporal warp is better, but it's better in the scenario where you're lusting on cooldown, because if you're holding your lust until 5 minutes into the fight, you're losing temporal warp uses, and then you just have less overall damage playing temporal warp over time anomaly. That damage profile can be valuable though. Of course, if you really want to do a lot of damage to a boss and execute, then maybe it's worth taking temporal warp for a smaller overall single target, but more damage concentrated in the area where you want it. It is important. So temporal warp, it's the best for fire and arcane as well. You can double lust with it, so 1 lust 46% haste, 2 I'm at 90, and they stack. With frost, we do not do this. This is what fire and arcane do. They double stack their lusts. Frost does not want to do that. Basically going over 100% haste is pretty bad for frost. It's not bad, I guess. It's just there's not much value to it. So instead of doing this where we double stack it, we just chain it. So after your first lust ends, you then lust again and have a minute 20 seconds of lust. But yeah, that's the main stuff to deal with single target. I took a lot of the utility out because this is mainly for a raid based tree, and energized barriers can sometimes proc from physical effects in the raid, like on Sun King Salvation and Castle Nathria when the Goliath slammed the ground, did an AOE that was physical damage that would proc or counted as a melee attack and would proc something like this. Otherwise, this removing snares is kind of useful, but you can throw it anywhere on the tree. To talk about Frost's gameplay, let's go over their base single target priority first. Your base single target priority is to Ice Lance until Winter's Chill, which is the debuff that Flurry causes, or use Fingers of Frost Ice Lance if you're not currently casting Frostbolt. So if you have a Fingers of Frost proc and you're not casting Frostbolt, you use it. If you have a Fingers of Frost proc and you are casting Frostbolt, you finish your Frostbolt and then you cast Flurry. So Flurry is the next priority, which is if you are casting Frostbolt and you have a Flurry, you will always use it regardless on if you have Brain Freeze or not. And then here, right after that is going to be Fingers of Frost. So if you have Flurry, if it's up, you use it after Frostbolt. If you don't have Flurry, then you use Fingers of Frost after Frostbolt if you have them. Otherwise, you go back to casting Frostbolt. You'll see that in the gameplay rotation I'm going to show you. Now, your full single target priority includes Meteor, Rune of Power, and Shifting Power, because those are the abilities that are going to be introduced to your rotation with talents. So Meteor is top of your priority if your last GCD was Flurry. That's because it benefits from Winter's Chill, but we'll talk about that later. Your Rune of Power if it's down. Again, this is the standard one, except for Shifting Power is above Frostbolt, and single target, you just Shifting Power if Rune of Power is down. Your opener, it looks like Frostbolt into Flurry, Icy Veins, Meteor, Frozen Orb, and then your single target rotation. If you don't have Meteor, you just remove this, and you would be Frostbolt, Flurry, Icy Veins, Frozen Orb. This is also, ideally a precast Frostbolt into Flurry. So, the Flurry combo, if I'm going to refer to it in the future, is Frostbolt into Flurry into 2 Ice Lances. The reason you do this is because Flurry hits 3 times. You can see it hits 3 times here. It applies a debuff with 2 stacks. If you don't know what that is, you should read your tooltips, but it causes the target to take damage from you as if they were frozen for the next 2 spells. We consume that with Ice Lance because Ice Lance hits the hardest as a frozen spell. Flurry hits between, or sorry, Frostbolt hits between the 3 flurry hits. Each of these flurry hits refreshes the duration of that debuff, so our Frostbolt gets that free crit chance from shattering for free. So that's why we always want to Frostbolt into flurry. Next, I'll just cover gameplay rotation. Just using Fingers of Frost procs because I don't have my casting Frostbolt. Once I run out of Fingers of Frost procs, I swap to using my Flurry combo. And now that I'm out of everything, I just spent Frostbolt, use Flurry at the end of my Frostbolt. And this is just Frost single target. We don't use Ice Nova rotationally, we only use it for movement in single target. Here, Meteor, into 2 Ice Lances. As long as I have a Flurry available, I'm just going to use it after my Frostbolt. Use Rune of Power when it comes off cooldown. Use Frozen Orb when it comes off cooldown. Here I'm just using my Ice Lances because I'm not casting Frostbolt. I figured I'd just give you an example of the opener with Shifting Power as well. So, Frostbolt, Flurry, Icy Veins, Frozen Orb, using my Ice Lances once I run out of them, start a Flurry combo. I did overcap Fingers of Frost, but that's what the APL does, so. Rune. Then after this rune is over, I will Shifting Power. Okay, this is over, so I'm Shifting Power, making sure I'm hitting the mob, Frostbolt into Flurry afterwards like normal, and then we're back to the normal rotation. So there you have it. You may be confused as to why I'm telling you to Meteor into a Flurry when there's only 2 stacks of Winter's Chill. Well, Meteor doesn't consume Winter's Chill, but does benefit from it. So if you Meteor and still 2 Ice Lances, all 3 are going to get shattered, which is pretty valuable. This burn also benefits from Winter's Chill, but we don't pay attention to that. Generally, like most AOE abilities benefit from but don't consume Winter's Chill, so that's things like Meteor, Comet Storm, Frost, Frozen Orb, and Blizzard. Ice Nova does consume it, so yeah, don't use Ice Nova really when it's active. But yeah, that's just why we use Meteor in that specific order in single target, and also that's exactly how you would use Comet Storm, but we're not going to take Comet Storm this season, it's looking like. So for Cleave, there's actually going to be 2 builds to play. The first one is going to be this. It's the single target build with Shifting Power. It plays the same way as the single target build with Shifting Power plays. And this is the build that you are going to want to run right now at the start of Season 1. However, once we get 2 or 4 piece, Blizzard actually becomes stronger. So you just remove Deep Shatter and Frozen Touch for Freezing Rain and Ice Collar. And then this is your 2 target build with Tier, and with this you just hard cast Blizzard on 2 targets. So before that you would not be playing with Ice Collar on 2 targets, so you just never cast Blizzard. But this is your 2 target build for Raid after Tier. This is your 2 target build for Raid before Tier. So it doesn't play any differently, except you would, hard cast your Blizzards with Ice Collar and Freezing Rain. So for AoE, there's also 2 builds. This is going to be what I recommend kind of as the default Mythic Plus build for you to run. This is really good single target and really good AoE. I have 3 points untaken here because it can either go into Dragon's Breath or for a more minor single target gain. You can take time manipulation, freezing cold, or sorry, not single target, AOE gain. Freezing cold is really bad, doesn't change your rotation at all. It's mainly time manipulation because you're casting Ice Nova rotationally in AOE. As mentioned before, time warp is just, or temporal warp is just stronger in, you know, situations where you're casting Bloodlust on cooldown. However, time anomaly is stronger in situations where you aren't. So, you know, you kind of use your discretion for which of these you want to use. But yeah. And then the other build is going to be dropping Slick Ice and Splintering Cold for Sub-Zero and Frostbite. This is actually going to be a pretty massive single target loss, but it's good for AoE. So you go here, this is a sim for one target. It's, you know, 11% better than sorry, the first build I showed you is 11% better than this build I just showed you, which has a bunch of AoE talents, and then it's just, you know, that build is then 11% worse at 8 targets. So, you know, if you had to say anything, I would say any dungeon where you're consistently pulling over 8 targets is going to be the one where you want to use the high target AoE build, which is this one. Any target count with less than that, you probably want to use the single target build. I will say that most of this gain is actually from Frostbite, so, you know, if you were to keep Splintering Cold but just remove Slick Ice or just remove Perpetual Winter for Frostbite, you would pretty much split your difference, and then it would just be, you know, half the single target loss for half the gain in AoE, basically. So maybe that's what you want to do instead. Instead of taking Sub-Zero, you take Splintering Cold, and you just keep Frostbite. But yeah. An important thing to note from here is this is an 8 target sim against freezable targets, and Water Elemental is DPS, it's just like within the margin of error of Lonely Winter. These are the same builds. Lonely Winter with Perpetual Winter, Water Elemental with Perpetual Winter, Lonely Winter with Slick Ice versus Water Elemental with Slick Ice. So yeah, they're pretty much the exact same. Water Elemental's not worth taking this season in Mythic Plus. If there was a time to be worth taking, it probably would have been at 8 targets, and it's not. So don't take it because it's like a 4% single target loss, as you can see here. It does 3.4% worse. But yeah, that's just all I have to say about the AoE builds. Of course, this build has the same, you know, distinctions on the class tree of whether you take Dragon's Breath or time anomaly. And we do take Rune of Power. So I will now get into the AoE priority list. So this is what your AoE priority list is going to look like. You know, you want to Frozen Orb on cooldown, you want to Blizzard on cooldown, you want to Rune of Power, again, if it's not currently active. Then your next highest priority is going to be Cone of Cold. If you have max Snowstorm stacks, then you're going to Flurry. The only time Flurry is this high, by the way, is if Frostbolt was your last cast. So what this means is that similar to single target, in AoE, we are only going to Flurry if Frostbolt was our last cast. Otherwise, we're going to prioritize Ice Lance with Fingers of Frost over Flurry. Okay? And then at 7 mobs, or greater than 7 mobs, it's not worth it to precast Frostbolt anymore. Even before that, you know, it gets more marginal the closer you get to 7 targets, so feel free to remove it. You know, once you get to 5 or more targets, you can not Flurry, or not Frostbolt before your Flurry, but even still, you would want to prioritize Fingers of Frost over using Flurry. You don't want proc much, if avoidable. Then you would Shifting Power, then you would Ice Nova, and then finally you would Frostbolt. So I'll give you an example of that. And I'll also actually write out a quick opener so you can see. Well, our opener is a lot more simple in AoE than it is in single target, though single target's not particularly complicated at all either. You're going to precast Blizzard, and then you're going to use Frozen Orb, and then you're going to use Icy Veins, and then you're going to use Ice Lance, and then, you know, you just start your AoE rotation, which is going to be pressing a lot of Ice Lances. So let's get into that. When you run out of Ice Lances, your first button's Ice Nova. Make sure to recast Blizzard. So Frost has pretty much only one of its own conditionals, and that's going to be if you have more than 50% haste, you can shatter Cone of Cold. If you're not aware of what I mean by shatter, this is the passive for it, and basically that's what you're doing anytime you flurry into 2 Ice Lances. Your Ice Lances are being hitting the target, and it's treating it as if it's frozen, because that's what Winter's Chill does. Causes the target to take damage from your spells if they were frozen. Well, you know what else makes them frozen? Your freezes. So if I was to Ice Nova and then Cone of Cold, you can see like all those crit because the target was frozen from Ice Nova. So this becomes a DPS gain to do at max Snowstorm stacks, but you need more than 50% haste to do it, and I'll just explain that next section. For now, you know, all you need to know is that if you have more than 50% haste, you can shatter Cone of Cold, which is basically just saying you'll use Ice Nova and then you'll use Cone of Cold at max Snowstorm stacks. And you only need 16% base haste to do this, because if you have 16% base haste, you'll have more than 50% haste in Icy Veins. And then this becomes your new AOE priority if you have, you know, more than 50% haste. And all it does is, you know, after Frozen Orb and Blizzard, basically you're going to Ice Nova if your next global will be Cone of Cold with max Snowstorm stacks. So this would also be and previous GCB Ice Nova. So yeah, that's all that happens. Now talking about kind of this mega advanced doesn't really matter at all section. I'm just gonna kind of spout a lot of stuff like I did for the arcane one, because I thought that was kind of interesting. If you don't really care about min-maxing, this doesn't apply, and even if you do care about min-maxing, this honestly doesn't really apply. I'm just gonna be saying a bunch of knowledge stuff. So the reason that you need 50% haste to shatter Cone of Cold, well, for starters, you don't. If you have Water Elemental, you can use Water Elementals off the GCD freeze to shatter it below 50% haste, but Water Elemental's never worth running, so don't do that. However, the reason you need this is because Roots and WoW have a minimum duration. They have a minimum duration grace period after they are applied of 0.5 seconds, and then they also have a grace period of 0.5 seconds after they've broken from damage. This adds up to 1 second for Ice Nova and Frost Nova. So in group content, you need your GCD to be equal to or like slightly below 1 second to ensure that you can shatter your spells after an Ice Nova, which in this case you're only shattering Cone of Cold. So yeah, that's why you need 50% haste, because you have 1 second when your group is breaking your Ice Novas. And not really important, but they just forgot to like implement one of those grace periods for Freezing Cold and for Frostbite. So the minimum duration for these is actually only 0.5 seconds. So oftentimes they only last 0.5 seconds, which is kind of unfortunate because Frozen Orb ticks every 0.5 seconds. So that means they only get 1 tick of Frozen Orb. Though again, you know, you're going to ignore Freezing Cold. Freezing Cold doesn't matter at all. But yeah, if it was 1 second, you get 2 Frozen Orb ticks, but that doesn't really matter. Anyway, let me explain this because this is a little bit easier. So if you gain haste during Blizzard, you get more ticks of that Blizzard than if you were to cast that Blizzard with that haste, if that makes sense. So Blizzard, its cooldown and duration scale with your haste. So for instance, you know, if I was to cast this right now, it'd be a 7-second cooldown and 7-second duration. If I cast an Icy Veins, it's a 5.5 second cooldown and a 5.5 second duration. However, if I cast this now and then Lust, it'll last for 5.5 seconds when it should only last for 3.2. You can see this had 70 hits. If I cast it again, it's going to have less than 70. So having cast it again, it only had 45 that time. It says 115. That's because, you know, it still has the previous 70. So 70 minus 115 is 45. So yeah, that's not really important, but you know, your opener generally gets the benefit of that because you are blizzarding into Frozen Orb and Icy Veins. So it's generally better to Icy Veins sooner into the cast than later, I guess. And then the reason for that is just because your tick rate scales up, but the duration doesn't scale down since it's already active. So kind of interesting. Okay. So as for this is one that could potentially have a gameplay impact on you if you raid. It's mainly kind of more important for raiding. Norner told me this because the man's a beast and knows way too much about Frost. So Hailstones is calculated on cast, which means that your target has to be frozen when you use Ice Lance for it to generate an icicle, which is mainly a problem when you are Ice Lancing before your flurry reaches your enemy. Now, that doesn't sound like it's too common, because it's not common at all, but the reasons that this would happen would be if your GCD is less than 0.8 and you're 40 yards away, for instance, your Ice Lance, your first Ice Lance in the flurry combo is not going to generate an icicle, which, again, isn't much of a problem because you're almost never standing 40 yards away from a boss in Lust, with a haste level of like 95% or above, which is what you need to have less than 0.8 GCD. However, this is a problem on bosses that have large hitboxes, because a hitbox increases the range that you can cast from, but doesn't decrease like the range that your spell needs to go. So for instance, if you're fighting a boss that has a hitbox of 10 yards, then you can hit it from 50 yards away, technically, because you just gain an extra 10 yards of range to account for its large size. But your spells still need to travel that 50 yards. So that's going to be a problem mainly for like Senarth in the raid, is you're going to have to stand closer to the boss in Lust. You can't stand like 35 yards away. Otherwise, you're going to be missing icicles every single time you flurry combo. Important to mention, I guess, is this doesn't matter at all if you proc munch, because if you're proc munching, then your first Ice Lance of the flurry combo is going to have Fingers of Frost, which means it's going to be frozen. So it'll just generate an icicle no matter the distance from your target. So yeah, basically, if a boss has like a large hitbox, stand closer to it in Lust, or maybe even closer to it, at any time. I might have butchered a little bit of that hitbox stuff, but that's what I've garnered from what Norner's told me. So yeah, that's all the kind of advanced stuff to cover for Frost. I can't think about anything else at this time, really. So we're going to talk about macros next. But yeah, leave any questions you have in the comments below. As I said, these two things really, they don't matter at all. Like, you can completely ignore them if that like overwhelmed you or anything. They don't matter at all. I just like explaining things, so figured it'd be fun to do. Some 2 tips that are pretty good, both for single target and AOE, but mainly single target, is going to be know what buttons you're going to press that are going to give you Fingers of Frost instantly. A common problem I see with people is they'll cast Frozen Orb and then start a flurry combo. If you're staying close enough to the mob, you can just Fingers of Frost immediately after you use Frozen Orb, because Frozen Orb generates a Fingers of Frost when it first hits an enemy. So for instance, if I do this, my next global could just be Ice Lance, because the first time Frozen Orb hits an enemy, it will give me Fingers of Frost. So yeah, we'll let that go away. And then the other one is if you're just doing your rotation and you just cast Icy Veins, you can just Ice Lance right after it, because you're guaranteed to get a Fingers of Frost from Icy Veins. So there's no reason for you to Frostbolt into Flurry with Icy Veins when you know that you can guaranteed not proc much there. So that can be pretty useful, but those are very minor optimizations. And as you saw from our opener and single target, a lot of the times when you're casting Icy Veins, if you're doing it during a flurry combo, you're going to proc munch anyway. So not too important, but I find the Frozen Orb one's a little bit better of an optimization anyway. For weak auras, you can see I have, a bunch here. Of these, there's only 2 that I kind of view as necessary, and that's going to be this top one with the white bars. I moved it since my AOE rotation thing because it was overlapping with my brain freeze, but what this is, it's a freezing winds tracker, so it shows you when you'll get your next freezing winds tick. It's every one of these like white markers, and then also at the very end, so you can know if your next global is going to be freezing or is going to be from Fingers of Frost, or if what you just got was an RNG Ice Lance. So I find it really useful. And then this one also works with Everlasting Frost. So it like shows you another tick, because Everlasting Frost gives you another tick of freezing winds. So it's pretty useful. And then I use this, it's called Learns, I don't know how to say that, Instant Winter's Chill. Basically, these two snowflakes represent your Winter's Chill stacks, and when you Ice Lance, it will remove one of those stacks on cast, even though the debuff's not removed till you hit the target. So for instance, you do need to be in I change it to only load in combat. So the first one you do, if you start it out of combat, it's not going to work. But anyway, see Frostbolt into Flurry, it glows light blue. Your first Ice Lance removes this, your second Ice Lance removes that. So now, you have no empowered Ice Lances. So you want to go back to casting Frostbolt. So I find that really helpful generally. The other weak cores I use, just Blizzard and Frozen Orb, they just pop up in dungeons when they're off cooldown, because it's pretty important to cast them on cooldown. It's just like an extra little reminder. I use Icy Veins, it's not really necessary at all. Snowstorm is pretty nice. My weak core only shows above 25 stacks, and it glows above 27. Sorry, voice. But if you were looking at the AOE priority, you might notice that the only time you're supposed to cast Snowstorm is with max, this only time you're supposed to cast Cone of Cold is with max Snowstorm stacks. So it's good to track this to know that you're only going to cast at max stacks. Snowstorm actually has a hidden duration. It doesn't display one on the buff bar, because Blizzard just accidentally added an aura to it to tell it to not display the duration, but it does have a 30-second duration. So if it's going to expire before the next pack, you should probably use it anyway. That's not really too common, because Mythic Plus chain pulling is pretty often. But yeah, that's it. If you do go into single target, by the way, with max Snowstorm stacks, you can use it on one of the Winter's Chill effects instead of Ice Lance. So. And then just generally, I recommend like a Rune of Power weak aura for all mages. It's just really good. This one like shows you if you walk out of it, it'll turn red. I walk back in, it's normal. So big fan of that. No other weak auras really. So, and all those are pretty optional. However, the Instant Winter's Chill one would help you combat one of the main problems I see a lot of Frost Mages have, is just like casting 3 Ice Lances after Flurry instead of 2. And that weak aura solves that issue, because, if you're only looking at the blue snowflakes, then if you have none, you shouldn't be casting Ice Lance. And then 2 miscellaneous tidbits. Mirror Image is a defensive cooldown. You shouldn't macro it into any abilities. It should not be macroed at all. Purely defensive. It does have a hidden use where it disperses threat while it's active. So if I use it when an enemy is attacking me, the enemy will swap to my mirror images. However, if I use it before I generate any threat, what's going to happen is all the threat I generate is going to be dissipated, and I just don't gain threat. This is pretty helpful in Mythic Plus, where if you just precast Mirror's Image going into a pack, you're just guaranteed to not get threat off the tank. So that's really useful. The other one is most people don't use Alter Time at all. This ability is OP. You should bind it, and you should use it all the time, because it's very strong. It's also off the GCD. So, yeah, very good ability. Closing thoughts. If you're viewing this video at a later date, you should probably cross-reference it with one of the written guides to make sure nothing's changed. You can also either ask in the Mage Discord in the Frost Mage section, or just comment on this video, and I'll let you know honestly what has changed. As I can say stat priority here for anyone that's made this far, it's Mastery Crit Haste first. So in Mastery Crit Haste first. You should sim your gear though, but that is just our stat priority. Not really having a list of BIS trinkets at the moment. Those are pretty preliminary. But yeah, hope this has been useful, and I'll probably post some Mythic Plus videos whenever that comes out. Kind of wanted to do more pushing this season, because I just kind of quit Mythic Plus essentially for the last 2 seasons, except for making videos. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, have a good rest of your day.